Hello and welcome back to the Meadowbank Thistle podcast. My name is Morgan Knock. We're now just 2 weeks away from the 2025 Meadowbank Thistle reunion. Tickets are selling fast and are limited, so click the link in the show notes to get yours. The event is taking place at Parkside Bowling Club next to the Commie Pool on the 31st of May 2025 at 7 p.m. The evening will be a celebration of all things Meadowbank Thistle, with speeches from Alan Banks, Jim Leishman and Terry Christie. There will be a buffet, an exclusive programme and a ceremony to celebrate the people who made the club special. You don't need to have been a player or a die-hard supporter to come along. You might just be interested. Just get your ticket online and turn up. If you experience 1% of the warmth that I have from this community of people, you'll have a great time. What's more, any profits from the event will be donated to the Edinburgh Food Project. Today's podcast guest is a little bit different from those we've had on so far in the series. Colin McPherson is a renowned photojournalist and documentary photographer, and has spent his career covering many major assignments, news stories, features and sport for media companies worldwide. He's also a co-founder of Document Scotland, a collective of photographers working together to portray aspects of contemporary life in Scotland through photography. In 2024, Colin was one of 3 photographers who compiled the sold-out landmark photo book At the Match, which was published by When Saturday Comes, and documented the matchday experiences of football supporters across the UK and Ireland. So why is he talking to me today? In the 1980s and 90s, Colin was a well-known face amongst the Meadowbank Thistle supporters, counting himself as a founding member of the Meadowbank Thistle Break Club, co-editor of the A.W.O.L fanzine, and a key figure in the birth of supporters football in Scotland. Colin McPherson, welcome to the Meadowbank Thistle podcast.
Oh, it's an absolute delight to be here. I'm not sure if I'm the first supporter. I'm not sure why I'm first in line to be shot down, but I will take that challenge, and I hopefully will inform your wonderful listenership a little bit about the life and times of a Meadowbank Thistle supporter.
Well, the thing that got me interested in this subject in the first place was what happened to the supporters. How do I not know this story? So I think it's really important to get many supporters' views on it. Like you say, you're the boat that's sat in front of me. So tell me where it all began. How did you end up supporting Meadowbank Thistle?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite interesting. I've been giving this a lot of thought over the last few days, obviously because I knew I was going to speak to you. I think, probably the vast majority of the Thistle support, especially sort of in the 1970s, came from a background of supporting one of the other 2 teams in Edinburgh, if not another team from further afield. But I grew up as a Hibs fan, which is rather strange because there was no family connection with Hibs. I lived on the other side of the city, other side of Edinburgh. So I think I only chose Hibs because I liked the strip, something like that. It was one of those kind of random sort of ways that boys get into football. And I would say I was kind of fairly dedicated to them. My dad took me to my first game as my 10th birthday present in 1974. And I have got memories of that. And I was thinking, did I really enjoy that experience of going to watch Hibs? And I'm not sure I ever did. And it was quite interesting because a couple of years after that, when I was only, I think, not even 12, one of my pals in the street where I lived suggested we go and watch a Meadowbank Thistle game. And I was aware of the club because I was a football supporter. And I remember when they came into the league, I had some sort of football yearbook, and it had the fixtures for the first season as Ferranti Thistle. I remember asking my mum, who knew absolutely nothing about football, why is this team called Ferranti Thistle in this publication, and it was called Meadowbank Thistle by kind of everybody else? And surprisingly, my mother couldn't answer that question. So I suppose that maybe was just sitting in the back of my mind. So my pal suggested that we go and watch a Meadowbank game simply because it would allow us to go on our own. There was no way at that age that my dad would have allowed me to go and watch Hibs, travel across the city, to a stadium with a few thousand people in it. And, football in the 70s, it was pretty hardcore. It was rough and ready. And I certainly wasn't old enough to take that challenge on by myself. So we were allowed to go and watch Meadowbank. So myself and a couple of other pals, we got on the number 45 bus took us all the way across town, down the high street, deposited us out at Meadowbank Stadium, and I've actually got a lot of memories of that game. It was in 1976. It was against Stranraer, and I kind of had a bit of a soft spot for a lot of Scottish football clubs. One of them, weirdly enough, being Stranraer. So I kind of went along sort of to support Stranraer, and they scored. They opened the scoring, and I remember kind of sort of getting out my seat, which was fairly near the front. I can't remember the goal, and sort of looking around, and there was just dead silence. And it was quite a big crowd, and I haven't actually researched the match. I probably should have. But I think probably Hibs were away or not playing that day, because I do remember there was quite a big crowd. There were a lot of people. Anyway, Meadowbank equalised, and then they scored the winner. And I do remember it very clearly because Kenny Davidson scored one of the goals. I think it was the winner. And he came kind of running down the athletics track right in front of the main stand with his arms aloft. And everybody was standing up and cheering. And I thought this was absolutely great. And the fact that you could sit in that main stand and get a beautiful view of the pitch. And there were one or two other things I remembered. I remember this sort of strange character down in the concourse with long hair selling programmes. And people sort of swarming around this little kind of trestle table with programmes. I later discovered this was, of course, Angry Al, at that time still known as Alistair Petrie-Hay. So these kind of little nuggets of information and sort of, kind of impressions stuck with me. And so much so that we went to a second match not long after that, although it may have been the following season. I can't honestly remember. And it was against Forfar Athletic, another team I had a little soft spot for. And the guy who opened the scoring for them that day was a guy called Tam Stephen, who everybody probably who's listening to this will probably know who Tam Stephen is, a wee baldy guy who went on to manage Edinburgh City. And weirdly enough, I interviewed him for the job of Edinburgh City manager and recommended his appointment. And I got to know Tam, and he was absolutely brilliant. But anyway, he scored one of the goals. But Meadowbank won that match 3-2. So I'd seen two matches. They'd won them both. And if you consider that they only won, 32 matches in their opening 5 seasons, and I saw 2 of them, they should have kept me there as some sort of lucky mascot. But that was kind of it. I didn't follow up on that. I continued to watch Hibs, despite the fact that as a club they were in kind of a bit of decline. The Turnbull Tornadoes had gone, all my favourite players had left, and the atmosphere at Easter Road, it was, the crowds were dwindling. It was really awful. I didn't enjoy it. So I went to football less and less. And the next time I actually came across Meadowbank was in the week before Hibs they got to the cup final in '79 against Rangers. And the week before the first game, because it went to 3 games in the end, the week before the first game, they played an East of Scotland Shield match at Easter Road against Thistle. And I went along to that, and I remember the only part of the ground that was open was like the grandstand, the main stand, and like the enclosure. And I was in the enclosure, and there were a couple of Thistle fans. I was aware of them, but it was all Hibs fans. It wasn't a big crowd. Anyway, Hibs won, I think 4-0, and Meadowbank were bloody awful, to be honest. They were they'd had a terrible season. I think they'd finished second bottom or bottom. And they were poor. But I remember at one point that they got a throw in very close to where I was standing. I was down the front of the enclosure. And Davy Conroy came over to take the throw. And he can only have been about 17, 18 years old, just a wee lad. And he came over, and all these Hibs fans next to me started slagging him off. And there was something inside me. I started feeling sorry for him. I thought, that's wrong. He's just a kid. He was not much older than I was. I was only 13, 14 at the time. And I was really pissed off about that. And it was another signifier that club was going a bit rotten. And although I went to the cup final and I supported Hibs, I think I was on my way out the door anyway, but the light hadn't gone on in the next room to say it's actually Meadowbank who you were going to support. So at the beginning of the following season, 79-80, my dad was from Aberdeen. And so I went up to visit his mum, my granny, up in Aberdeen for the weekend. I mean, a teenage boy going up to Aberdeen for the weekend to visit his granny. The most boring thing you can imagine. I mean, in the most boring city you can imagine. But my auntie, who was still living at home with my granny at the time, she said, why don't we go and watch Aberdeen this weekend? And I was like, oh, well, why not? Never been to Pittodrie. Had hardly been to any grounds, to be honest with you. And it happened to be playing Meadowbank Thistle in the League Cup, and it was a second leg tie. They played the first leg at the stadium during the week, and Aberdeen had won 5-0. It was Fergie's team. It was the team that would go on to win the Premier League that year. I mean, it was, and they were all out that day. They might have won 5-0, but you know what Fergie was like? It was like no mercy. So they were all there. Bobby Clark was in goals. McLeish, Miller, Stuart Kennedy, Gordon. They were all the stars. They were all playing, and there was quite a big crowd, and we were in the home end, and they were all shouting, "We are evil." I remember that, looking round, these Aberdeen fans saying, "We are evil." I was thinking, you're playing Meadowbank Thistle, you don't have to shout that. But anyway, Aberdeen raced into this 2-goal lead, and they were knocking the ball around, and it was like Meadowbank were getting absolute pasting. And then the second half, something happened. I don't know, maybe Aberdeen just took the foot off the gas, whatever it was. And Meadowbank scored these 2 goals. And I think in all the years I supported Meadowbank, it's still the 2 goals I go on about most. They were absolutely brilliant. The first one was Watty Boyd. I think Jobbo broke down the right. He cut in, he squared the ball back, and Watty Boyd coming through from midfield, popped it in the bottom corner. Great goal. I was right behind, so I had this great view. I thought, wow, that's a good goal. And then the first thing I noticed was this little group of about 6 or 7 Thistle supporters at the front of the main stand at Pittodrie. And you know how it's a sort of deep drop down, and they all had their scarves over the front of the main stand, and they were all like jumping about. And I thought, oh man, look at that! There's some Meadowbank fans. And then about 8 or 9 minutes from time, we got a free kick about 20 yards from goal, and I'm right behind it at the far end there. And Jobbo just curls this one round, and I just can still see it. And Bobby Clark, who was of course famous for being statuesque, he just didn't move, and the ball into the top corner, top bins, as they say. And these Meadowbank fans were going crazy, and I actually stood up, and then all these 8,000 Aberdeen fans who'd all been singing "We Are Evil," all looking at me, and I was like, "Oh, better sit down." And it was that moment. I thought, wow, yeah. I mean, and they were an Edinburgh side, and I think I just put 2 and 2 together and thought, maybe I should go and watch them. Maybe they're worth watching. And maybe I recalled a little bit about those previous times I went to the stadium, but in general, that was just when the light went on. And 79, 80, I started going to home games. And it was quite interesting because, again, going back to the Hibs thing, I mean, football in the 1970s was still very traditional. It was male, it was very working class, and I wasn't working class. I came from a very middle class background. So you're kind of entering different territory. The tradition was that working class people would stand on the terracing, and the middle class people would sit in the stand. And I think right through to the 1970s, that was still true, and certainly in Scottish football. And for me, when I started going on to Meadowbank, that sort of thing didn't seem to matter because everybody was just sitting together. And okay, there wasn't a big crowd; there was maybe 300 or 400 people, but there was just this feeling of light and space, and just no threatening language, nothing nasty. You could just walk in, you could watch the game, you could come away. There was no kind of walking over that scary wee bridge and outside Easter Road, and I don't know. It just felt really good, and the team were not bad at the beginning of 79, 80. They were playing some nice football. Jobbo had signed, and he was a bit of a, as I've written about, he was a bit of a sort of boyhood hero of mine. But it was really more than just the players. It was also this kind of burgeoning relationship that I had with the other supporters, and I didn't know anybody. When I started sort of identifying as a Meadowbank Thistle supporter, I knew no other Meadowbank supporters. Nobody, none of my friends, nobody was interested. I don't think I'd ever met a Thistle supporter. So you'd go along on your own to the game, and there would be this little hardcore gaggle of people who obviously knew each other and wore the scarves and everything like that. And even that was quite funny because there's no souvenir shop. So they all had different coloured scarves on. If you went to Hearts, everybody had a maroon scarf on. If you went to Hibs, it was always green. You went to Meadowbank, you looked around and it was all yellow, orange, mustard, amber, all these, homemade knitted stuff and everything like that. And it just all looked really and felt really different. And then there was the stadium itself, which again was, I don't know, just this amazing space where it obviously wasn't designed for football, but it just had this kind of aura about it. And I got very much into architecture, still am. And the stadium for me, and I know it was detested by fans across Scotland, and players hated playing there. But you know, you ask me or you ask some of my pals, and that place was just, it was our place of worship. But it was more than that. It was just, we were very proud of the place. And I think it's, to bounce forward 40 years, it's one of the biggest sins that the city allowed that stand to be demolished. I thought it's a piece of vandalism. So I loved going there. And then kind of over that first season, you know, I would sit down the front, and then there was this little gaggle of Thistle supporters, and they would sing funny songs. And, you know, week by week, home game by home game, I would just sort of sit a little bit closer to them, to a point where I'm kind of sitting more or less in the same row and joining in with the songs. And I'm not saying that's how I got myself noticed, but if there's only 30 or 40 of you singing, then people do notice you, I suppose. And, you know, I started having little chats with one or two people, but I was chronically shy as a kid. I was just, I couldn't speak to anybody. So I was just happy, just joining in with the songs, watching the games. And just, the other thing, of course, is they had Cheers, the fanzine, which it was amazing. So I got to kind of know all the characters, all the fans, before I really even spoke to them or met them. Because Cheers was like a chronicle of what they got up to. So, you know, you got to know about Charlie and Serp, Jim McKellar, the Pastor, people like this. You know, and they became kind of almost larger than life cartoon characters in my life. And yet I didn't really know them. So that was kind of the sort of first full season for me was 79-80, and they were not a bad team, some good players. They started well, but they did what Thistle always characteristically did in those early years. They were quite good up until the pitches start getting heavy in October, and then it just all went to pieces. And so, you know, they finished back fourth bottom, but it wasn't a bad season. But the other thing I learned very quickly, two things. First of all, as I said, there were no Meadowbank Thistle fans anywhere. So if you admitted to it, it was almost like you were coming out. It was just a weird experience. People would look at you with a mixture of wonderment, bewilderment, pity, scorn. I'm not saying they would kind of lead you away and give you a talking to, but it was like, yeah, but who do you really support? And it was like, no, this is who I go and watch. This is the team I support. And they were, yeah, whatever. But I think just because, you know, my friends started to respect me because I would go every week, or certainly every home game. And the other thing you built up is extraordinary amounts of resilience. Because being a Meadowbank Thistle fan is, you're not in it for the glory. You expect really to get beaten most weeks. A win is a bonus. And you just learn to kind of take that on the chin, that the football, although it was important and you wanted to win, and it was a great feeling, you know, when they scored a goal or you won a game, ultimately, and this is what I learned over the years as I got to know people and got more involved with all my friends, the football really was secondary in many ways to the friendships. And building those friendships up was the best thing that ever happened to me in my life, because I wasn't a very healthy child. I wasn't a very happy child. I did have friends. I hated school. I just didn't have an identity. And punk rock and new wave was my way of kind of getting into something that would lead to a sort of a period of self-expression. And that self-expression came from me by identifying as a Meadowbank Thistle fan, because you were different if you did that. You were different. And, you know, you could take the slaggings, and, you know, there were people didn't think you were serious about it, but you just didn't care. So that whole thing, the supporters, bit by bit, just became real family to me, and absolutely loved those first 2-3 years. Although, as I said, you just had to get used to getting beaten most weeks.
That's a fantastic introduction, and there's so many things to pull out there. John Jobson sent me that article that you were talking about how you wrote that you were his hero. So that should be a crowning glory that's come full circle. When I interviewed him, having put Jim Lumsden in the same room as him, and him going over and saying, "You are my hero," that was such a priceless moment. That's like probably one of the 5 top things that keeps me going with this. Like having witnessed that.
I've never met him, never set eyes on him. I never actually knew what had happened to him, and then I found out, he was at Celtic, and I watched an interview with him a while back, and it was like, God, there's Jobbo, and it was like, yeah. But he was, if you like, he was totemic, because centre forwards at football clubs, they get all the glory as long as they score the goals. And okay, we're not talking about Golden Boot or anything like that, but previous to that, top scorer at Meadowbank maybe had about 8-9 goals in a season, Stevie Hancock or somebody like that, or Jimmy Hancock, and 5 of them were penalties. But Jobbo actually scored goals, and he scored great goals, and it just, I don't know, he was just my hero. But there were a lot of other great players that I liked at that time as well. And it's funny, then you kind of move on to that next season, 80-81, which on the pitch was just an absolute disaster. But it sowed the seeds for what was to come, because Willie McFarlane, obviously, he got the sack after the Bucky debacle, and Terry came in, and obviously nothing changed on the pitch immediately, because he was hamstrung by what he had and had to work with, and but that season 80-81, there were a couple of things. I started going to a few away games, so even that, I went to Hampden on the bus when John Peel came along with us, and got lost under the main stand. Me, Angry Al, and John Peel under the main stand at Hampden, with Angry Al's lighter, trying to find a door to get out onto the terracing so we could all stand together. And I mean, it's just one of the most bizarre things I've ever done in football. And so started going to these away games, and that kind of gets you into the tribe, doesn't it? Because that marks you out as somebody who's got a commitment above just going to home games. And despite the fact that, I mean, we were pretty rotten, despite having some good players. Even Willie McFarlane, he did sign some very good players, but we just didn't seem to put it together. And at one point we had a European Cup Winners' Cup winner, Davy Smith, playing at the back for us, but we were still absolutely hopeless. And so you kind of that resilience that you built up, that it just taught you that, right, anything you can get is going to be a bonus. And the next season, 81-82, by any matrix, was a great season, because we had a good team. We had a great cup run. We beat Arbroath up there when they were top of the second division. Then we went to Clyde, and they were top at the time. We drew at Shawfield. Oh my God, all these Teddy boys gobbing at us from the stand and chasing us up and down. And there was only about 8 or 9 of us there, and I don't know how we got out of there alive. But a great performance by the team. There was only 11 fit players. We drew 2-2. Then we took them back to Meadowbank on the Wednesday night. We smacked them 4-2. It was great. Then we got to play Dundee away in the third round, and that just felt like, for me, going to a big ground like Dundee with Meadowbank, it was just, it was phenomenal. You were just sitting in this ocean of space on the away end, singing the little songs which were floating up into the Tayside air, never to be heard. And I think we got beat well, but it was just a great day out. And that season, although again we kind of plummeted towards the end, you could see on the pitch things were starting to kind of move, and Terry was getting his tanks parked for the big charge. But then obviously what happened the next season was just, I mean, era defining for Meadowbank Thistle, but also for the support. And at the beginning of that season, in the October, I turned 18, and while had been very keen on sneaking into the pub and having the odd pint, we're just party central after that. You're 18. You were the whole load of guys who, most of whom are wee bit older than you. So I wouldn't say they led me astray, but they certainly showed me how to have a good time. And that season, I mean, we were just winning, and we were on the road, and the away games were epic trips. I don't honestly remember too much about the football. People ask me about specific games, and I'm a bit hazy about that. But some of the trips down to Stranraer in March, when we went back to the top of the league, and There was just so many great games, and obviously it culminated in Brechin City. Everybody on the pitch, their fans on the pitch, us on the pitch, just joint jubilation between the two sets of supporters. Lovely atmosphere, just unique, wonderful. And I loved going back to Brechin every time after that, and had so much love and respect for that club. And just because so much had happened that day, it was I remember we had the Player of the Year due the week before, and we got spanked 3-0 by East Fife, and I think most of the supporters were just losing their shit, thinking we're not going to get promoted. We'd been miles ahead, and we had the Player of the Year, and I remember speaking to a couple of players, and they were just like, "Relax, we'll get the point next week. We'll do it." And we were all in bits, and they were like, "It'll be fine. We'll do it." And of course, we went up to Brechin, and they scored in the first minute, and then it was like, "Oh Christ, here we go." And then Mickey scored the equaliser, and we could have won it, and it didn't matter because we drew. We were on the pitch, and I know the players probably have regrets that they didn't win the league that year. To us, I don't think it mattered. It was just the fact that we'd actually done something. We'd come to a bit of national recognition, so you had articles in the paper. You'd pick up the Scotsman, and there'd be a match report or some sort of feature article about Thistle, and you just think, a couple of years ago you couldn't get 3 lines in the evening news, and here we were. I remember Terry being on the TV and stuff like that, and it was just like you were suddenly supporting a proper club. And it was a bit unnerving because there was no handbook. We were never told, this is how you're going to do it. We were just Meadowbank Thistle, always going to be the poor relations in Edinburgh. We were never going to have a big support, but we just went along with it. We just went along for the ride, and it was just brilliant. And the next few years, okay, we got relegated the following 2 seasons later, but we'd had the Skull Cup semi-final, games against Rangers. I mean, beating Hibs. Good God, beating Hibs at Easter Road. I mean, that was a moment, especially for a lot of us who'd been Hibs supporters. For myself, standing in that exact spot at Easter Road when we beat them 2-1, exact spot where those guys had been slagging off David Conroy. And for me, it was just like, wow, I just knew then it was all right. I'd made the right, it wasn't even a decision. I'd just been propelled by my own momentum to support this club. And I never had any regrets, and I never had any feelings towards Hibs in the sense that, I still look out for the results. From the day I shut the door on that chapter, I couldn't care less how they did. Them or Hearts, I've just no opinions of them. They're just football clubs like everybody else. And Meadowbank were the team for me. So it was great, It was, and that whole 1980s period. It's a bit of a haze, if I'm brutally honest. I mean, some of the great games stand out. The people we met, by that time, the support had started to grow as well. And I think, though, despite that, we'd still managed to keep the kind of ethos with the fun, not taking ourselves seriously. If anybody was going to laugh at Meadowbank Thistle, it was going to be us. And we proved that time and time again. We could take the mickey out of ourselves, and when other sets of supporters took the mickey out of us, we would take the mickey out of ourselves even more. And that was kind of disarming for other clubs and other supporters. And that was the lovely thing about it. It just grew organically. We didn't suddenly inherit a whole load of people from a different part of Edinburgh, a different club who wanted to watch us. It was almost like you were building the support 1 by 1, 5 by 5, 10 by 10. And I'm not saying everybody was the same. That's the point I'm making, is every single Thistle supporter in some way was unique. Everybody was different. There wasn't a sort of homogenous mass when you look at certain supports and say, that's a typical so-and-so support. They were all just unique. Everybody was an individual. And we did very individual type things as well. We're at the forefront of starting the fanzine movement. I mentioned Cheers, and then A.W.O.L came along. And that was all very much in response to still all the bad things that were happening in football, which, although they didn't really touch us in the Scottish Second Division, the kind of racism, the violence, crowds were dwindling, the antipathy towards football amongst not just the football, the establishment, the political establishment, and even people, that Everybody was falling out of love with football, and it was not difficult to see why. And I think fanzine movement, of which we were absolutely front and centre, was part of a kickback against that and saying, well, hang on, football supporters, we are the ones putting the money in. We are the ones that are the bedrock of football. We are the bedrock of this sport. Don't take us for granted. But at the same time, we're going to do something positive. There's going to be positive stuff. We're going to reach out to other fans of other clubs in other countries, because their experiences are much more in common with this perception that the world had of football fans who were just seen as uniquely violent, evil, racist, misogynist, homophobic, which to an extent they were, but they were also great people within the support of every club. And I think we just tried to reach out to them through the magazine, through A.W.O.L, but also through the Scottish Supporters Football League, which we'd started in. There'd always been people interested in playing football amongst the support. And when we used to go up to places like Forfar or Brechin, we used to stop at Cooper Angus. And the older ones used to go off for a pint, but us young ones, we used to all just play football. And then we started a team. We managed to get, don't ask me how, we managed to get a set of strips from the club. And we started playing friendlies against other supporters teams, Queen's Park, Stenhousemuir, Dundee, and Stirling Albion, people like this, and just found that actually these guys, they think like us. There's an element of kind of communality about it, camaraderie, and playing football. It wasn't in any way competitive. You'd want to win, but it was all about getting to know them, having a beer afterwards, just generally singing football's praises. And these friendly matches, that just developed into the odd tournament. And then Charlie, I think it was Charlie Lowry, really, it was his brainchild. He said, let's start a football league, a league on a Sunday. And it became the only national amateur football league in Scotland, and it ran for 30 odd years. And I was very lucky, I was the first chairman. I was only about 20, hadn't got a bloody clue. And you had all these people coming from all over Scotland, and you had to deal with real issues, like discipline and referees and pitches and all sorts of stuff. But overall, it was just worth it, because people would have a rivalry on a Saturday. We would play Wraith Rovers and we'd all shout at each other and what have you. And then on a Sunday, we'd be playing them in the Scottish Supporters Football League. And then we would go for a drink with them. And they all became buddies. And, especially Queen's Park, that's a friendship that just endured through the ages. And it was wonderful. And it gave this kind of second dimension to being a Thistle supporter. So you had your football on a Saturday, and then you had this other thing on a Sunday where you were playing the football against supporters. And I had as much fun on a Sunday as I had on a Saturday. Just loved it. It was a privilege to be part of, and it was just great fun. And we kind of took on the philosophy of Meadowbank Thistle. We were rubbish. So, it didn't actually matter that we got beat most weeks. We just enjoyed it. And when we did win, we celebrated triple, quadruple hard. It was just wonderful. And that was kind of the 1980s for me. I kind of put off growing up and getting a serious job, and as it was, I ended up in journalism as a photographer, photojournalist, and very fortunate to travel the world doing all these things. But the 1980s for me were just all about Meadowbank Thistle and the creative things that we did, the friendships, the adventures. There were difficult times. We had fallouts. There was the odd fight and disagreement. But in general, I think we came through fairly unscathed, and that was true more or less right to the end. And obviously we all fought collectively very hard to save the club through the early 90s. And Terry going, I think, felt like a watershed moment. That was really after all those years. We knew it was going to be something that was going to define the club into a new chapter. What we didn't realise is that was more or less the beginning of the end. On and off the pitch, most of us just put our efforts and energies into saving the club after that, and the football really became completely secondary. I barely remember a game from 1992 onwards. I know I was there, and I see stuff popping up you put stuff up on Twitter on this day and what have you. And I think I was probably there. Yeah, I was probably there, but I was probably leafleting or shouting things about a certain man and stuff like that. But it post '92 for me, it kind of lost its glory, if you like, its varnish and veneer. And for me, anyway, at that time, I'd got my first job. I was working at the Evening News as a photographer, so I often worked Saturdays, so I couldn't go to a lot of the matches as well. So although I was still absolutely dyed-in-the-wool, 100% loyal supporter, the magic was kind of on the pitch, off the pitch was starting to wane a wee bit. And, I think it was inevitable what was going to happen. I think we knew the writing was on the wall. And then after that, it was just like, what do we save? And what we did save was a whole load of people going to Edinburgh City, a load of friends, and those are friendships that have largely endured, although I've moved away from Edinburgh years ago. So, that was taking a little bit of what we had. It wasn't ever the same, but we just tried to recreate a little bit of that Meadowbank atmosphere at Edinburgh City. And to an extent, I think we were successful, but nothing will ever compare to the glory years through the 1980s. Just an immense time. Very privileged to have been there. Very privileged to have met the people I did meet, and also to see some of the players, because we had some great players and they were great to watch. And we were very lucky, very lucky.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story. There's so many threads there that I want to pull at. So first of all, talk to me a bit more about fanzines. So you arrive on the scene and Cheers is out there. What's the story with fanzines from that point?
Well, Cheers had kind of lapsed by, I can't remember when the last issue was, 81, 82, something like that. And then there was just this gap. I mean, Cheers was a complete outlier because there were one or two other sort of more music-based fanzines in the late 70s, early 80s. There were one or two football ones, but there was no sense of a kind of movement or anything like that. And A.W.O.L came along really because, things like The Absolute Game and then When Saturday Comes started, and I can't remember the first issue of The Absolute Game that I saw, but I was, really kind of captivated by the fact that, people could do things on their own like that. I'd been doing a little match day programs for the supporters team because that was kind of my background. I love doing that that's the one thing I loved doing at school, was doing the school magazine and kind of all that cutting and paste, typing stuff out, pasting stuff down, simple stuff, glue, nothing, no sharp objects, not with me. So it was that sort of thing. And then, obviously a number of our supporters were involved with the official programme. But I think the feeling was that, as we went up the leagues as well, you had to be a bit more careful what you wrote about things in the official programme. I remember Alec wrote a very interesting piece about a supporters do that we'd had to raise money, or it was just a regular meeting, and somebody had asked from the floor, what are the committee's ideas for raising money for the supporters club? And a number of ideas came forward along the lines of sponsored runs and lottery tickets. And then it got into sort of, well, what about armed robbery? And of course, this was all like faithfully written down and printed in the match programme, except it wasn't, because somebody in the club hierarchy actually Tipp-X'd out the bits about armed robbery. So it was obvious that we were kind of slightly getting censored. And I think it just grew from there. And when The Absolute Game was on the go, and one or two other fanzines, and I just remember being on a bus to somewhere. I think the Break Club had just started, and there was a feeling that if we were going to have a club, we should have a publication. And I remember, there was a lot of enthusiasm, but it was the usual suspects, and I was a bit like, you know what's going to happen here? Everybody will go, I'll help. And then by issue 3, it will be 2 or 3 of us. And no, we'll all pitch in. Of course, I was absolutely correct. By issue 3, it was 3 or 4 of us. But we stuck at it. And to be fair, a lot of other supporters did come along and did contribute. But in terms of the nitty-gritty, typing stuff out, letraset, pasting stuff down, taking it to the printer, stapling it, distributing it, selling it. There was a small group of us that did it, but we absolutely loved doing it because put us in contact with a lot of great people. And it gave us a little bit of a kind of platform to spout about the stuff we wanted, the political stuff, because that's another thing. Our support was quite political. And that's something that kind of retained all the way. I wouldn't say we were all of the same political opinion, but certainly I came from a very, very political home. And so I was very familiar, with that kind of whole idea about politics. I was really interested in it. And when I got to know a lot of these guys at Meadowbank, the supporters, I discovered that as well as the music that I had in common with them and the football, I had a lot of politics in common with them. And, there was, as I said, there was a lot of racism and stuff going along around at the time, which I absolutely hated, and I know my friends did as well. And so things like the fanzine movement, they were very much founded on the principles of these things are wrong in football: racism, homophobia, identity cards, hooliganism. We can do something about this. And it was just a platform, and it was a really good platform. And it was an opportunity for people who maybe had never written something or never done a cartoon or written a match report or done anything like that. It was their opportunity to get that in print. And as the magazine expanded and we were more and more desperate to fill more and more pages just to make it bigger and bigger and better, that's why we ended up with like records and stuff like that. It was just great. So, people who you thought, I had no idea they had any talent for writing anything, and they would come out with an article about something really left field, and you think, that's absolutely brilliant. And I know, speaking to fanzine editors throughout the last 35 years, people I still know, they adored A.W.O.L. It was the granddaddy. It was the one you waited for to come plonking through your letterbox. And when I used to go down to London quite a lot for gigs and stuff like that, to watch football and what have you. And I used to go into sports pages in Charing Cross Road, and the guy that ran it, a New Zealand guy called John Gosted, he used to lay out all the fanzines. And every time you went down, there were more and more fanzines. And A.W.O.L was inevitably right there in the middle. I was so proud of it. So it was just brilliant, and it was, as I say, it was a platform to get across our identity as well. It was fantastic, and it's great. It's kind of still going. I mean, when I started, that first article I wrote for When Saturday Comes was the one about A.W.O.L, and I wrote for them a little bit on and off. And then when I moved to England in 2004, almost by accident, I started taking photographs for them. And I've been working for them ever since. And this Friday, I'm at Annan against East Fife, photographing for them, and I love it. It's the thing professionally I love doing the most. I love writing about football. I write for Nutmeg and stuff like that. And I've written a lot about Meadowbank and about supporters and stuff like that. But getting the camera out and going to a game for When Saturday Comes, it still makes me feel like we've got that fanzine ethos, and I've still got that inside me. And I know that the pictures that I take and the way they'll be reproduced in the magazine, I'll be talking to kindred spirits, a lot of people who will have been A.W.O.L readers in the 1980s. Just brilliant.
A.W.O.L was the publication of the Break Club. So you've got your T-shirt on now.
I have.
You're the first person to get the platform to tell me how the Break Club came about.
The Break Club came about, I think, because there was a bit of a schism in the fact that come 1986, there was a kind of hardcore of us who we didn't really want to kind of go along just to games. And what we found is, as the support was getting bigger, it was kind of accommodating. This is going to sound terrible. It was accommodating more people, like families, kids, people that kind of wanted just to go to the game, rock up at 2:45, buy their programme, go in, watch the match, support the team, come out the ground, go home. For a good group of us, that wasn't enough. It just wasn't, and it's not what we were about. We wanted to go early. We wanted to go to the pubs. We wanted to have that flexibility, and I think there was just a sort of misalignment between the supporters club, which began to feel a bit more of a po-faced organisation. And don't get me wrong, some of the people in the supporters club were absolutely wonderful people. I won't have a word said against them. Well, not too many words anyway. But just at the time and the age we were at, I think we just felt we wanted something a little bit more anarchic, a little bit more in our own style. And so it was, I mean, there were one or two drivers to it, but Angry Al, I think he was the sort of man that kind of coined the phrase break club, and he was the first kind of organizer, got it off the ground, ran the buses for the first year, stuff like that. And it was just very aligned to the way we thought. A lot of people maybe looked at us and thought we were a bit over the top, we were a bit this, we were a bit that. And we were to an extent. We were kind of the provisional wing, we were the hardcore, we were the Rota Armee Faction, we were the Baader Meinhof gang, we were all that and more. But we kind of revelled in it, in the notoriety of it a wee bit. If you look back, you think, ridiculous. It was like the Citizen Smith thing or whatever it was, the Tooting Popular Front, and then it splits into different, iterations. And before you know it, there's 100 supporters club with one member each. But it wasn't like that. I mean, we set it up with good intentions. And I think we also had the feeling that maybe that just let the supporters club off the hook. They can go and do their own thing. No harm to them. Although we did write some really horrible things about them in A.W.O.L, which are hysterically funny. And I stand by most of them. But, and I mean, I don't know what the kind of club hierarchy and the players must have thought. They thought, Jesus, there's only 60 of them at an away game and they're going in 2 buses. What the hell are they thinking of? But it was just the way we evolved. It wasn't revolution, it was evolution. And the Break Club was, it was just brilliant. I mean, we just got up to all sorts. And we kept the ties as well. It was funny, you sort of think the winner takes the trophies. So kind of the Belfast branch with whom we were very close, and the Wirral branch, ironically, where I live now, they kind of stayed with us. They came with us onto the kind of Break Club side of that, and there's just because I think that their worldview was more aligned with what we were thinking than the supporters club. But there wasn't any malice really. I mean, we did a lot of piss taking, but at the end of the day, we all filed in through the same turnstile. We all supported the same team. We all sang the same songs, and maybe it helped. It helped grow the Break Club a bit more. It gave us a bit of freedom. I think the supporters club, maybe it grew, allowed more people to come to the games. So maybe, okay, I'm putting a bit of reverse psychology on it here, but I think maybe it was good. Maybe it had to happen. Maybe it was good for the support. I certainly have no regrets about it. It was fabulous.
If anybody has a problem with what Colin just said, then you can be in the next interview.
I'm sure they will.
That's brilliant. So we will do another episode where we talk about the end of Meadowbank Thistle. But I want to just skip ahead. What came next for you?
You mean after Meadowbank?
Yeah.
Well, I was involved with Edinburgh City. I went there and got straight stuck in. And it was really interesting, a really interesting journey because we went really from being a bunch of supporters who'd been, we'd been outsiders all our lives. If you're a Meadowbank fan, you were an outsider to start with. But then, through the whole 1980s, and then when the club started to implode and that whole thing campaigned to save it, we were real outsiders. But then we went along to Edinburgh City, and it was, hang on a minute, we're the inside. We are the club now. They didn't have supporters. They just had people that went along and watched them because they're maybe their mate or their son or daughter, and they played for them. They didn't have, it was an amateur club playing at Fernieside on a sloping pitch, and it was like David Baxter, he was the first along. He got persuaded there by Alan Day, and got involved. And then start of the 95-96 season, we didn't have a football club. And as it was for me, I wasn't particularly looking to support anybody else, but it was the friendship thing again. And it was like, all of a sudden, it was like, we're all going down to Hoyt Royal Albert. All right, okay, we're going on the bus. Oh, what, like our supporters bus? No, we're going on the service bus, the number 95. And we went down to Hoyt Royal Albert, and they've got the most tatty ground in the world, and a tatty football pitch as well. And and there was a social club selling bottles of beer, and there was about 30 of us, and we just had the best day ever. And it was like, wow, this is fantastic. I don't think we won. And there was actually an ex-Meadowbank player playing for them, a guy called Zeb Stewart. And we sat around talking to him after the game. He was about 42 at the time. And I mean, the football was pretty ropey, and the facilities were awful. But we were all back there was a whole load of us all back together. Not everybody, because a whole load of Meadowbank fans didn't make that transition, and that's absolutely fine. And that wasn't the point. The point was a load of us did, and then a few more of us joined, and then it was just. But at the same time, you couldn't just go to the games. You were actually responsible for putting the games on. We were taking the strips home and washing them. We were going to Fernieside and we were putting the nets up. We were scraping the dog shit off the pitch. We were opening the dressing rooms. It was a different world, and it was. I had some experience of that, obviously, with the amateur team, the Sunday team. So I knew a wee bit about that. But then we applied to join the SFA. We applied to go to Meadowbank, and I was part of that bid. The SFA came to Meadowbank, and I was part of the bid team. Myself, David Baxter, Kevin Hogg was there, and there was one other, I think Alan Day or Martin Massaro. And all the SFA bigwigs were there, and we're all. I don't think I'd worn a suit since. In fact, I'm not sure I'd ever worn a suit. And then I was standing in a suit, and we were walking around Meadowbank, and the SFA are saying, and what's this area of the ground, and what's that area of the ground. And then one of the bigwigs turned to me, just looked me straight in the eye and says, "And what do you do at the club?" And I didn't have an answer for him. It was something like, I just help out, sort of thing. Oh, well, I just thought, well, I'm on the committee. I'm part of the committee. And we want this because we believe that the club can move forward, and we're very ambitious, and we want to drive standards. And this stuff came out of my mouth, and I thought, that wasn't bad. And lo and behold, I'm not saying that was the reason, but lo and behold, we got into the SFA on the strength of having Meadowbank Stadium. So the whole thing very quickly turned full circle. And we played our first game January 1996 at home to Selkirk. There was about 60 people there. I didn't care if there was only one person there. We were back. We were back at the stadium, and it was different. And I can't compare the two. I'll never compare the two. They were two completely different experiences. But there was at least something. It felt like some of us had salvaged something for ourselves from the wreckage. And then we just kept working away. It was East of Scotland League. We were mediocre. For years we were mediocre, always trying to get into the Scottish Cup, always trying to punch way above our weight, trying to raise money, trying to get through the qualifying cup. And we did have success. We beat East Stirlingshire and got through to play Dunfermline in the third round of the Scottish Cup. An absolutely incredible day. Gordon Ray was the manager for a while. And, just bit by bit, we sort of built it up, the club, and then won the East of Scotland League, which was fantastic, totally out of the blue. And then just sort of got into the Lowland League. And by that time I was away, I was down in England, but I was still contributing to the club, and financially a little bit, and where I could, supporting the club. But I just kind of watched that sail, and then it was amazing. I was very much around when they got into the league. First club ever to get promoted on the pitch in Scottish football history to the Scottish League. What a day! What an honour! And then just although things turned a wee bit sour for me in the club over the years, I kind of I've no malice. I still watch out for the results. I'm a bit sad that they're not playing Annan on Friday. It's going to be East Fife, because it would have been lovely to see a few of the old faces. But all that sort of receding into a bit of distance for me, and having been in England now for 20 years and focusing very much down here, I'm involved with coaching down here. I coach my daughter's football team. She's going under 18 this year, so I've done all my badges. I did my first coaching badge in 1986 with the SFA. And I just recently did the equivalent one a couple of years ago with the English FA as well. So I'm not the next Jose Mourinho, although my language is probably just as bad. But I just enjoy it. And I've been very lucky. I continue to be very lucky with football. You know, I can make a living out of it. I've been able to travel and take photographs and write about the game. And I suppose doing the coaching and stuff like that is just putting a wee bit back in, however small that is, just to see a few smiling faces. It's great. So yeah, that's kind of what I do in a nutshell.
What do you think of Meadowbank Stadium in 2025?
I haven't been. I've not been to the new stadium. I photographed it when it was getting demolished, and I wrote about it in Nutmeg, and I've not been back. It looks absolutely dreadful, and by all accounts, as a place to view, spectate, it's about the worst you can imagine. But kudos to the club. It looked like they were done for last year, but they've bounced back, and you know, they're an Edinburgh team. It's a bit like Spartans. I know this will be heresy to say it, but you know, I'd quite happily have 42 Edinburgh teams in the Scottish League. You know, that would be fine by me. But no, I mean, I as a spectator experience, it looks dreadful. I mean, I understand the economics behind it. I know why they did it. The council, I get it, but it doesn't make me any less sad about the fate of that great stadium, because, you know, we had the Commonwealth Pool and we had Meadowbank Stadium. To me, they were two absolute gems. The Commonwealth Stadium's still going. Why they couldn't have done something more imaginative to retain the stadium and its architectural features, I don't know. But that's something I wasn't part of, and you just got to let go of that now, really. That's it.
What are your most prized pieces of Meadowbank memorabilia?
I don't have much. Probably the T-shirt, only because it actually still fits me, which is some sort of miracle. Yeah, I mean, the T-shirt I think just sums it all up. When we did the launch of At the Match, When Saturday Comes photography book, we did it last year in London, and I wore the T-shirt to the launch, and I was very proud of that. I thought it was great, and I've got one or two other bits and bobs, but I've really not got much. I don't have any programs. I gave them all away. No, not a lot. I've got a lot of memories, and you know, if I feel a bit nostalgic, I'll go onto YouTube and watch the 6-1 win at Ross County. Still the best piece of television anywhere in the last 50 years, I would say. But yeah, apart from that, it's yeah. And if people ask me, it's funny because people do ask me, what's your Scottish team? And for many years it was kind of Edinburgh City, and I would just say Edinburgh City. But now I've kind of gone back to saying Meadowbank Thistle. I think it's to put people off the scent. I was over in Northern Ireland recently. I was covering a match there, Glenavon against Larne for the magazine, and I was as we do, you know, there's stuff on the pitch, just like me as a spectator. Stuff on the pitch is kind of secondary, so I'm snooping around, taking pictures of all sorts of things, and they've got 3 social clubs underneath the main stand. One is it's for private members. It says it's private members only. The second one says private members only, and the third one says strictly private members only. So we met this guy, and he says, "Oh, go in and have a little look round. There's some great memorabilia in there." And I was like, "Oh, great!" So me and Simon Wallace, Belfast branch, the Meadowbank Thistle Supporters Club, who was running me around that weekend, he said, "Come on, let's go in." So we went into this place called the Triangle Club, and we were like, "Oh, this is fantastic! All the memorabilia, the old photos, some real sort of Masonic stuff," and it was like, "Whoa, this is absolutely brilliant!" And Simon was off down one end of the club, and I was off down the other, and looking around in wonder. And the barman looks over to me, just looks me straight in the eye, and he goes, "From Scotland, yeah?" And I said, "Yeah." "Celtic or Rangers?" I'm like, "Oh, you don't want to get asked that question in Northern Ireland." And I blurted out, I says, "Meadowbank Thistle." And he just looked at me. "Aye, very good," he said. And he didn't know. I could have said something in Mandarin. He had no idea what I was talking about. And it's quite nice because when you say it, it kind of throws people off the scent. And then if people are interested, they will start asking about the club and the history and stuff. And, "Oh, yeah, I remember them." And I think, the hell you do. But, you know, it is nice when people kind of remember the club. because they did punch above their weight for many years, and they contributed significantly through the 1980s to Scottish football, on and off the pitch. But yeah, it's funny that in terms of kind of, I've just got my memories really, and lots of great memories, and they'll do me. I don't really need too much more to kind of get all nostalgic and teary. Whew. Is there anything else I want to get off my chest? Probably, but you mellow with age, don't you? No, I mean, it was just an amazing experience supporting that club, meeting as I said, the supporters and the players as well, and Terry. They were great people. They were a central part of my life, the most important part of my life for many, many years. And I mean, clearly I had other things going on, not quite that sad, but just in terms of, as I said, defining what I was, and to an extent what I've become, and continued that interest in football. It was just an amazing experience, and I just hope supporters, whether they're Thistle supporters or from any club, have that kind of positive feeling about football, which is what I have, despite what happened in the end to the club. To me, I've kind of put that to bed. That happened. Shit happens, and you kind of, it's funny when you encounter supporters who, I've supported the same team for 50 years, and I'll go to my grave supporting this club and what have you. And I always think, Christ, I've had more clubs than Jack Nicklaus over the years. I'm a regular at Tranmere Rovers, and I always had a soft spot for them, and so I go and watch them. Me and my daughter go and watch them, and I've got a big pile of friends that I go and I love the club. I was down there this morning because my wee boy was winning a cup at the ground for his school, and it's just I love the club. It's great. It's full of holes, just like Meadowbank. It's full of crises every 5 minutes, but it's just great. It's football, and if it wasn't them, I'd be watching somebody else. And we're privileged football fans. We're privileged that we can go to games. And the good thing that came out of things like Hillsborough is, okay, it might have corporatized and sanitized football, but it's made it a lot safer. It's made it a lot easier to go to games. And the fact that I've been able to take my daughter, but both daughters actually, along to games, and they feel included. They enjoy it, and they can play. My younger daughter plays. I think that's what football can give you, and I think I'm very just mindful of that and thankful of that. And we'll just keep going. But yeah, I'm very, very sad that I won't make the event on the 31st for family reasons. So, but if you have another one, I'll be there.
Definitely something we're looking to do moving forwards as a regular. What regularity we get to, I don't know, but yeah, I don't want this to be a one-off. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for joining us, and then listeners, don't worry, you will hear from Colin again as long as he's willing to participate.
Your audience figures might hit the floor after this, but I hope not. Thanks, Morgan. I really do appreciate it, and I think I can speak for all the players that have been engaged with you and also the fans. It's great that somebody's taking an interest, and I'm a documentary photographer. I believe in documenting things. I think what you are doing is fantastic, and I wish you all the success, and I really look forward to the book when it comes out, or if it comes out, hopefully it will. And just thanks. Thanks.
2026.
I look forward to it. Can't wait.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
My pleasure.
There we have it, Colin McPherson. Pleasure to get to speak to Colin about what it was really like to be a Meadowbank Thistle supporter. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. We deliberately did not speak about the demise of Meadowbank Thistle in much detail. We will be revisiting that at a later date. I didn't feel like we could do it justice in this particular episode, but in the future we'll be having a multi-contributor feature on that period. Also, all the best details will be going into the book which we mentioned during the interview. So yeah, if you enjoyed it as much as I did, please let me know. Give us a rating in your podcast app or a thumbs up on YouTube. Tell your friends and family. tell me, let everybody else know that you're enjoying the show, and hopefully we'll get to spread that story further, wider, and bigger than ever before. You can get in touch with us via social media. So on X or Instagram, we're at Meadowbank This. On Facebook, it's Meadowbank Thistle FC, or you can email meadowbankthis@gmail.com. There's one last plug for the reunion event. You can get your tickets on the link in the show notes. This is the Meadowbank Thistle podcast. My name is Morgan Knock. For now, it's goodbye.